Hello, Gen Genies. It's me, Julie.
And Rich.
Before we get started today, we want to let you in on some exciting news. We have launched our new Patreon page for the podcast.
Woohoo! We are super excited about this new chapter for CutOff Genes.
So, Patreon is a website where listeners like you can pledge a small monthly amount. We're talking only $5 or $10, guys, to support the podcast and help defray the cost of bringing you the show each week.
To be clear, CutOff Genes will continue to be absolutely free. But to thank you for your support, we are going to offer our patrons some fun little extras.
Like early access to the podcast every week, where you'll get to hear the latest episode before it's released to the general public.
And why not make your friends jealous with exclusive patron-only CutOff Genes swag?
Fancy. And here's something you guys have been asking for, and I'm really looking forward to this. I'm going to host a monthly, hour-long, online Ask Me Anything session where patrons at the $10 level can literally ask me anything.
Anything? You're a brave woman, Julie.
You know, I know. I'm also going to give access to my blog, Are You My Father?, where I tell the story of my search, actually it's my life story basically, for my biological father in even more detail than I did on the podcast.
Wow, your blog was the original inspiration for CutOff Genes, wasn't it?
It was.
Wow. Well, all patrons at any level will receive a shout-out on the podcast along with our undying gratitude for your support.
Yep. You guys know that this show is a labor of love for me. It's something I'm very passionate about. It'd mean so much to me if you would consider supporting our work here on the podcast by going to patreon.com/CutOff Genes podcast.
That's Patreon, patreon.com/CutOff Genes podcast.
We'll add a link to it on the podcast and on the Facebook page. Thank you all, my Gen Genies.
And now, on with the show.
Woo!
Is your family tree a mystery? Are you fascinated by genealogy? Well, hip, hip, hooray, let's talk DNA with Julie.
The truth is in your genes.
In CutOff Genes.
Welcome to CutOff Genes, the podcast that helps you find your truth using nothing but DNA. I'm Julie Jackson, and I'm a genetic genealogist, henceforth known as a Gen Genie.
And I am Richard Castle, the co-host and producer of this podcast. Before we begin, Julie, I just want to address our wonderful podcast listeners. You know, I feel like, although we don't talk a lot about the science itself on this podcast, we are a little more casual when we talk about DNA. But I am assuming everybody that listens to us is a believer in science because we believe in the DNA and all that.
Science is king.
And so I'm just going to make another personal appeal to everybody to please get vaccinated. It's not really safe out there right now unless you are vaccinated. So please, because we care about you, we care about the world, please get vaccinated. That's my public service announcement for today.
I will just agree with you.
Good.
Because I'm so sick of it. And I will say that I have edited my Facebook friends to make sure that that stuff doesn't come up, that I aren't personally engaging with people with these crazy beliefs. Okay, I am one that knows that I am not going to change any minds.
Right.
At this point. But I'm also one that needs to say what I need to say in order to let off steam, or I'm going to lose my mind.
Yeah, interestingly, I don't talk much about this on social media.
I mean, I wish I didn't, but again, I mean, I think I have to. Yeah. I personally have to.
Yeah. Because it kind of hurts my soul if I were to engage, and especially when I read these back and forths that are so awful, on social media, and maybe it's only because I'm on this podcast, there is no back and forth. It's just you and me, Julie, and the listeners listen and they can talk back to us, but we don't hear it. So
yeah,
maybe that's why I feel like I can make this PSA.
Oh, right. I mean, I don't know. Here's the thing. It's like, I'm happy to debate with somebody and I like debating, but some guy said that there's lots of articles about it saying that the vaccine is dangerous, and there are actual doctors who say that, and I'm like, show me. And so he sends me this one podcast link, and it's a podcast in Canada, and the guy is saying that there are things in it that make things happen that are bad, basically. It took me 30 seconds to Google the guy. And first of all, he's a veterinarian. Second of all, there's article after article saying that he doesn't know what he's talking about by actual peer-reviewed experts.
Right.
But that was all he had. But he still cannot hear the truth.
Right.
And that's what drives me nuts. And that's when I start calling people stupid.
Yeah.
Because I know that's not helpful, but that gives me a little bit of peace.
Yeah, it's funny because we can use our little magic Google box to find out pretty much anything, right? Things that we used to have to go into the library to discover. And you can find it instantly. And in some ways, it's such a great gift to have that. In other ways, it is super dangerous in that you can find things unless you look a little further.
Right, unless you know what you're looking at.
Yeah.
Because if you see something that agrees with you, then you have to look into what that something is and see how credible that entire institution is.
And, to bring this back home, because we are a DNA podcast, a genealogy podcast, this is really what you do, isn't it, Julie? When you're looking up somebody's tree, you don't just go, oh, I see this on someone else's tree and that's a match, so therefore it is the truth.
No.
You double check it and you check the DNA.
You have to follow up. You have to have multiple connections that make sense. And you need somewhat of a paper trail, even though the paper trail's off because people lie, but science doesn't. So, yes, you're exactly right. When I have a hypothesis, when I believe that something is such, in a case, I have to double check and triple check and make sure that everything fits and that there are no extenuating circumstances and there are no, for instance, I have to make sure that that particular couple that I believe is the grandparents of a client, for example, didn't have any other kids that I haven't looked at.
Right.
So you have to look at all of the available information.
Yeah, and to quote almost every teacher I ever had in high school, check your sources.
Yes.
And, do you remember this? Do you remember having to do like a bibliography when you did a report to show this is where I found this information?
Well, that's what genealogy does too.
Yes.
You have to show your sources and you have to cite your sources and blah, 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 blah.
Right.
And by the way, I'm tired of people saying, do your research. I'm like, literally a researcher.
I know, but I have learned that research, the word research is actually...
I mean watch YouTube. Yeah.
is actually, it's sort of like a dog whistle word for look at the crazy conspiracy theories.
Right. That's considered research.
Because, I remember when I was getting my first vaccination shot and the nurse told me she was not...
yes, I remember that. That's nuts.
And I said, really? Because you're a nurse and all that. And she said, well, I've done my research. And I was like,
Lord.
So the research that you did is still allowing you to put that shot in my arm.
Right. I mean, we all know that there are risks to any kind of vaccination, but there are also risks to getting into a car or eating a hot dog or taking a birth control pill.
Right. Which I've never done, but I hear it works.
Well, it does work, but there's a risk of blood clots, which is also one of the risks in taking the vaccination.
Yeah.
But let's weigh out our risks and see what is more likely.
So now that we're done with that stuff, Julie, let's talk about science and DNA, real science and DNA. What's going on in the news?
Okay, let's talk about the Real Housewives of New York. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. So, truth be told, I watch Real Housewives. Not all of them, but New York especially, because this Ramona woman I can't look away. Her behavior is beyond, and I can't believe the things she chooses to do on camera that will be there forever. So it's just one of those things where I feel I need to witness it because I wouldn't believe it if I just heard it.
Well, this is like, again, if this was a fiction and not a real housewife, this is why we watched Dynasty in the 80s. It was like, to see what horrible things that Joan Collins was going to do,
Yeah, exactly.
But it was scripted. Sure. It was not Joan Collins. It was her character.
Yes. Okay, so there's a whole other thing we can talk about, and if somebody wants to start a thread in the group, I'm there for it. Okay, so but Ebony, who is the new housewife, who is the first Black housewife on Real Housewives of New York.
She's the first one, and her name is Ebony.
Yes, it is.
You cannot write this stuff.
But she's consulting with the Gen Genie.
Good for her.
And because she does not know who her father is, she did find there was somebody who thought that they were her sister, and they tested, and they're not sisters. But now she's consulting with a Gen Genie, and I thought, oh, why wouldn't she call me?
Well, if she did use the term Gen Genie, then perhaps she would have already known about you, because I believe you coined that phrase.
Well, kind of, yeah. I mean, I think I coined it. I'm sure other people coined it around the same time.
I'm sorry. We're trademarking it right now. Gen Genie. Trademark.
TM. So there's that. And I thought it was interesting. And next week, we're going to find out what her genetic genealogist discovered.
But it's kind of neat that even on a show that's as popular as I believe that show is, that someone is going and researching.
Right. And I'm excited to say, I think that will certainly change, because there are still so many people who have no idea what direct-to-consumer DNA testing can do. So, yeah. Okay. Somebody posed a question on one of the groups. It might have been a DNA detective, DD Social or something like that. So it says, person A donates her egg. Person B donates his sperm and fertilizes person A's egg. Person C carries this fertilized egg in her womb for 9 months. What percentage of DNA will that child have from person C? Thoughts?
My guess is 0.
Your guess is correct. Absolutely 0. A surrogate who has no genetic connection to either the egg donor or the sperm donor will not share any DNA with that child. No, she is literally an incubator.
Yeah, and I mean, she is feeding and nourishing the child. Yes. But that doesn't change the DNA.
Correct.
It's like saying I eat chicken and therefore I got chicken DNA. Which, I have been called a chicken.
Somebody did give an answer that was was interesting. It really doesn't change the DNA in the child, but said a small amount of DNA from baby and surrogate will mix, and both will have small amounts of each other's DNA through the placenta. Oh, I didn't realize the baby did too. It's called fetal-maternal microchimerism.
Oh.
So it has to do with the placenta, and I don't know. But ultimately, no. Genetically, they will not be related. A DNA test will not show any of that mother's DNA, at least a direct-to-consumer DNA test will not.
I'm so glad that after 4 seasons of co-hosting and producing this show, I answered it correctly.
Yeah, I am glad too, frankly. But it takes, if it's something you've never really thought about before, it might be a bit of a mind bender. All right, I frequent a Facebook page called Intriguing Death Certificates and Stories because I'm morbid. What do you want? And this one got my attention. So there was a time in the 1800s, up until the later 1800s, where a cause of death was often called or was often referred to as a visitation of God.
Really?
That the deceased died very suddenly by the visitation of God, to wit, of convulsions.
Does that mean like natural causes, what we call natural causes today?
So for centuries, doctors struggled in the darkness over the causes of diseases and death and how the human body functioned. If a person died because of the doctor's limited knowledge, they could only describe the cause of death as a fever, apoplexy, or convulsions, or what he could visibly see, such as a head wound or evidence of a lifestyle such as overindulgence of drink. Occasionally, he would describe the cause of death as visitation of God. Used in a more religious time than ours, it meant the death was inexplicable, and it was thought that God had decided it was time for the person to die.
Wow.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, in some ways, I guess you could describe every death that way.
Sure, exactly. Yeah, right. It later came to mean that the person died of natural causes, like you said. Very good. It was a verdict often given by coroners, juries, particularly in the 19th century. It was very rare that any autopsy was held, and a doctor would give his opinion from the physical evidence of the body before him and the accounts he heard from others of the health of the deceased. Also, the coroner was only really concerned with the detection of crime. So the medical reason for the death did not matter to him once criminality had been ruled out.
Right. Yeah. It wasn't a murder.
Exactly.
So therefore, it was natural
Right.
causes.
So
or
even though we didn't know
visitation
what
by
it was,
God.
wow. Wouldn't you be curious? In 1837, compulsory registration of births, deaths, and marriages was introduced in an attempt to bring statistical order to the reports made by the Registrar General of Births, Deaths, and Marriages on the numbers of such events. Coroners were directed that the cause of death were to be made in precise terms. Terms such as natural death or visitation of God were to be avoided, where more precise medical terms on the cause of death could be used. However, there was a slow response to these directions, and it did not overcome the problem of a death where the coroner was not involved. Many doctors continue using the term for a long time, right up until the 20th century.
Wow, really? Well, I think, again, here we go with science. Again, this seems to be the theme of our podcast today.
It does, doesn't it?
Is that, yeah, because like before they had the science, they attributed it to
God.
Religion, to God, just as someone thousands of years ago looked up at a shooting star and thought it was a sign from God.
Wasn't it?
Well,
Sorry.
but they didn't know the science behind it.
Yes. Wow. And so much of that is still happening.
Well, it's a constant battle.
It's a constant battle. Let's take a break.
Okay, let's take a break.
If you're enjoying our podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review. Or consider supporting us on our Patreon page, patreon.com/CutOff Genes Podcast. Now back to Julie and me.
Can I tell you that my favorite thing is helping listeners of the show?
That's wonderful.
There's a whole other level of gratification that I receive from being able to do this for listeners. Because they get it, and I know that they take it seriously and that it's important to them because they listen.
They know who you are. They know what you're about. Right.
And they tell you when you talk to them on the phone, you sound just like you do on the podcast, which is not surprising. Yeah.
That's nice.
Which is fun. So Liz Cook reached out to me, and she has been working tirelessly to help her niece find her biological father. And she had done a lot of work. The first few hours that I work on it, I don't reference her work. I just go from scratch as to what I am seeing in the DNA.
Sure, because you don't want to repeat any possible mistakes.
Right, and I don't want to, and I want to make sure that I come to that conclusion on my own terms and didn't miss anything that
Sure, that makes sense.
Did.
Because science...
Yes. So the science, once again. So after the initial analysis, I basically had come to a lot of the conclusions that she had, even though they weren't conclusions, they were just assumptions based on the DNA. So here's the deal. So the niece knew who her mother was. She grew up with her.
Okay.
But she doesn't always tell the truth. And she gave a name and said he was in his 30s. I took that with a grain of salt, which is good. So the highest match was just over 200 centimorgans, which is low for doing this kind of work, but is certainly not impossible. I've solved cases with that low a match many times. And she's been working on it and just keeps hitting brick walls. There were two significant paternal lines. One had a tree, and they'd actually tried to help Liz. And their tree was very open, and she gave her thoughts on she thought it might have been through which line, and I knew that, so I looked at that line and could find no evidence of that line in the DNA. So kind of put that to the side. The other line didn't have too much of a tree, but after a few hours, I was able to connect them to the other people in that particular cluster. And they were a large Polish-Czech family with a lot of repeated names.
Okay.
Because everybody's named after somebody. And after a while, I realized that one of the lines wasn't going to connect. Like, the two of those should have connected at some point to each other, and I couldn't see where I spent hours on it. And so one of them had to be come from an NPE. It had to be somebody in that family stepping out.
Okay.
So there's no evidence of it in the general public.
There you go, unearthing skeletons in the closet
There
again,
I go.
Julie.
Yeah, I know. I took another look at her ethnicity estimate and then noticed that she had 17% European Jewish. And then going back and looking at the matches, none of those top matches on her mother's side or her father's side that I had already clustered together as a group had any European Jewish.
Aha.
17% is significant amount
Yes.
of something to not have any of your matches, your identified matches have. So I knew that I had to go below 100 centimorgans, which is where I usually stop in the initial cluster sorting, if that makes sense. Because, yeah.
It's like the floor, but then sometimes you need to dig under the floor.
Exactly. Precisely. You're so good. That was a really good analogy. All right. So I had, and also I had triangulated a possible great-grandparent couple. So I knew could be pretty close if it wasn't coincidence. But I started researching their children, and they had 2 sons, and one of them married a woman with a Jewish name. Aha! So I found her birth registration, which basically said this person with this name was born here on this date, but it doesn't name the parents. And I couldn't find, and I did find her. I found her Facebook page. I couldn't find anyone that had that name, her maiden name, in her matches, or not her matches, in her friends, and I couldn't find it. So it was, and at the same time, Liz was doing the same thing because she realized that was highly likely the connection, and she couldn't find anything about her either. So you can't do an ethnicity search on Ancestry, so I had to manually go through the lower matches. So as I was scrolling down, I noticed there was a match of 103 centimorgans that had not been sorted and did not have a colored dot next to it. And either I had missed it or he had just come in as a match. But I clicked on him, and he was 100% European Jewish. Aha. So clicked on, and he had a few matches that were lower. But very quickly I was able to, and he didn't have a tree, but very quickly I was able to research him, figure out who his parents were, and start to build the tree up from there. And then I started talking to Liz, and I said, okay, we're going to say the name is Bjorgi. And I said to Liz, I found a new over 100 centimorgan match that is 100% Jewish. And I'd never looked at before or never seen before. His name is Orville Bjorgi. And she went, yes! I was like, she's very excited. And then she said, well, don't you remember that one of the couple who I assumed were the great-grandparents?
Yes.
One of their sons' middle name was Bjorgi.
Wasn't
Bjorgi. You know what I mean.
I know.
And I'd completely forgotten that, even though I had noticed this name. And so I immediately, my heart started palpitating. I'm like, oh my God, you're so right. Okay. So I very quickly built it all the way up as far as I could. I knew I had to go 2 or 3 generations up. And by the way, genealogists love it when people give their children middle names that are historical family names because of things like this.
Yes.
It really just kind of put that last puzzle piece into place. So after about a half hour, I discovered that the new matches, Bjorgi's father was... his father had a first cousin who married a man named Bjorgi. And their daughter was the woman who had married the son of the couple that I thought were the great-grandparents. And it was solved just like that. Just like that.
And would someone... I'm a little confused as to... So you found someone who had very... below the floor of Centimorgans, right?
Well, no, he was actually above. He was 103, which is, and it looks like he's only been a member since July.
Right.
So I think his results may have just popped up.
But
because
that was
normally,
enough.
yeah.
Well, how does that relate to the 17% of Jewish European Jewish?
That means that it actually fits almost perfectly for one of your great grandparents being Jewish.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I guess I'm trying to, do the math between the low centimorgans and the high percentage of ethnicity,
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily. I mean, all of the match, like this match, was 100% European Jewish.
Right.
But it was, he was 103 centimorgans, which what he is to the client is a second cousin twice removed, which is not that close.
Right.
But it was enough to get me where I needed to go using my tree building skills.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I've got a dead tree in the front yard. I'm hoping you'll come over and take a look at it. Maybe you
do
can
a little pruning.
You do a little pruning. You can help me out.
Sure.
Well, that's interesting. So Liz must have been thrilled.
Liz was thrilled, and I'm going to talk to her. It was late last night. I've started working on this on last Friday, I think, Thursday or Friday. Mm-hmm. And then I got the initial part done, the initial 3 hours done right away. And, we talked about, I showed her where I was. And then she decided that, fine, let's go ahead and just do this whole thing. But I love doing it. So that's how I just.
You got to love what you do.
Absolutely. So Liz, thank you so much. I might have Liz on the show at some point so we can talk more about it. She has a great story herself. But I'm really happy. And if anybody would like to reach out to me, you know how to do it. joolsjackson@cutoffjeans.com.
Shall we take a break?
I think we shall.
Thank you for listening to Cut Off Jeans with Julie Dixon Jackson and Richard Castle. You can support us by going to patreon.com/cutoffjeanspodcast. Now, back to the program.
Okay, it is story time, and it is the finale of listener Holly's epic Odyssey.
Epic Odyssey.
Yes. So Holly is another listener that reached out to me to help her with the final part of her journey, the very final part, which you'll hear about at the end of this interview. But when we left off, she was still looking for both of her biological parents, and she happened to be living in England and received a message from somebody from an old DNA test that she had taken, and let's take it from there.
Let's listen.
I opened it, and I had to reach out and grab the railing because I thought I was going to faint, because the first line of his reply says, "Wow, I know who your grandparents were."
Oh, yeah. Wow. That's so cool.
Yeah. So I am like, what? I just about pass out because I just think, God, this is it. This is it. It's going to happen. So he said, yeah, there aren't a lot of options. And yeah, I'm pretty sure I know who this is. And he's super into the genealogy. He's got a huge tree. And
that's awesome.
So he says, okay, I'm going to try and make some inquiries and see what I can find out. He's like, I think I'll have to tread lightly with my family because, we've never heard of this. And he's like, I think I can tell you because it's far enough back. He said, I can tell you that our great-grandfather we have common great-grandparents. Our great-grandfather was the town doctor of a small town in Georgia for his whole life and died kind of right after World War II. His wife, our great-grandmother, died. She died fairly young. I forget exactly when, but not before having 8 children. So they had 8 children, and they all stayed in Georgia except for one who had moved to Boston. And so that was why it was very apparent. And so he says, I'm going to try and send some messages because luckily this cousin who was from Georgia but had gone to graduate school in Boston. So he knew some of this guy, which turns out to be my grandfather. He knew some of his children because he had spent a Thanksgiving with them one time when he was up in school there. So he's like, I'm going to send some messages and see what I can find out. And he's like, I'll let you know because I haven't talked to them in many years. I have some decade-old email addresses I'll have to see how it goes. And in the meantime, I could see his tree, which was public and really big. And so I immediately I could see my great-grandparents, and then I could see all 8 of the children who are also all deceased. So I could see them. I could see the name and everything. Mm-hmm. So I start looking down the line on all of them, like born in Georgia, died in Georgia, born in Georgia, died in Georgia, till I get to the one that is born in Georgia, died in Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. And then I was like, okay, now I know who he is. And I had the name. And luckily, it's not a super common name. So I Googled it and I got his obituary.
Yes.
And he died in 1990. So I don't know how I got it, but I mean, I literally was spending like 8 hours a day just like searching stuff. I was putting together my whole tree. I was doing it all.
It's your full-time unpaid job.
It was. My kids would go to school and I would, I would start working on it. And so I found him, and then I had the names of all his children. And he had 4 boys and 1 girl. Okay. And so I start searching them.
And so at this point, you weren't sure whether this was your maternal or paternal side, obviously, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I didn't know. It could have, one of the boys could have been my father, or one of the girl, or the girl could have been my mother. I didn't know. And so but I'm looking at them, and then I find their names, and I Google the name of the daughter, and I found like she had worked for like a school district, and I found like a picture of her. It was like her department that they'd taken a photo, and it was in like a school newsletter that had been posted like online or something. Right. And I see the picture of her, and she's tall and she has red hair.
Okay.
And I knew from the non-ID information that she was tall and had red hair.
Right. Right. Red hair.
So yeah, I have my suspicions, and so I just, I'm researching these people every which way. I know who all of them are, and I have a good idea that I'm thinking maybe it's her. She would have been
the right age,
young, but around the right age, okay. But I still don't know. Eventually, kind of mid-October, October 9th, I actually looked that up back. I get a message back from the cousin, and he says, "Okay, I've made contact with my cousin in Boston, and she wants to have your contact information. Can I give it to her?" And I said, "Yes." And I knew. I was like, "It's her. I know it's her." And
was she the cousin he was referring to?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
And so I say, "Yes, give it to her. Absolutely." And he says, the cousin who's so great, he's just like, "Okay, I'm just going to kind of back away now and let." And he's like, "But if you ever figure it out, can you let me know?" So he gave her my email address, and I said to him at the time, I said, "I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I'm thinking that she's around the right age. She could be my biological mother." And his response was, "Oh, I think she would have been too young."
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, she was 16.
Oh, that's not too young.
But no, I was like, that's not too young. It happened all the time.
Trust me. Yeah.
Yeah. So, because she had 3 older brothers. The oldest ones were like 10. They're twins. 2 oldest are twins.
Yeah. There it is.
So then I wait. And a day goes by and I get nothing. Like a week goes by, I don't hear anything. Like 2 weeks go by, I don't hear anything. 3, it was torture. And I'm thinking, maybe she's changed her mind. And then on my birthday, my birthday is the 11th of November. So it was about a month later. I wake up on my birthday, and I'm in England, and I wake up and there's a message, an email. And it just says like, "Hi, Holly, I heard from my cousin that, you guys have a DNA connection and that you were adopted. And I'm wondering if you can give me some more information about where you were born, and we can see how we connect." And it said, "I'm really excited about this, and I hope you are too." And then the last line said something like, "And if you think this is a mistake or you don't want to pursue it, I totally understand." She was, sure. I think she was scared. And so So I was actually getting ready to go down. It was my birthday, and I was getting ready to go down to London to see a show and to spend the night. But I messaged her back, and I said, here's where I was born. This is all I know. And
today is my birthday, which you probably know.
Yeah. Today, I was like, I was born today. And,
yeah,
actually, yeah, and that I've always been interested in knowing my biological family, and if you can figure it out. If you know how we connect, let me know. Even though at that point I knew who
your
she was.
restraint is amazing.
Yeah.
I will say. Okay, go ahead.
And so I sent it off, and then I went down, and we had our day in London, our night, and but I was a horrible person. Like we were in a club, and I'm like in the corner, like checking my phone every 5 minutes. Like I was just so preoccupied with that the whole time. And then the next day, we were actually going back out to where we lived in Warwickshire, and we were on the rail replacement bus because the train broke down. So and then I get the message, I get a response, and it said, "Hi, dear Holly, I believe I'm your biological mother." And just I was just like, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it was actually happening. And
it's that moment in your life that all adoptees have. Like, what if I actually met them? What if I? It's so surreal.
Absolutely. Yeah. She said, my mother was the only one that knew of your birth. So eventually I respond and I say, oh my God, this is amazing. And, we're in touch. I can't believe it. And I said, can you tell me anything about my biological father? I'd like to know as well about him. And it's funny, I feel like as a kid, it's all about the mother.
Yep.
I thought I was shockingly old, way past the point where I knew where babies come from, probably in my early 20s, where just one day it dawned on me like, oh my God, there's a father too.
There was 25 years in between finding my mother and finding my father.
Oh my God.
At first I wasn't interested, and then I had my kids, and I was like, oh yeah, there's a whole other component here. Yeah. And then when you have your kids too, and then you start realizing that, not only do you not have medical information for yourself, you don't have it for your kids either. And that made me angry. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so eventually she says, your father was my boyfriend in high school. And so I was born in November. So she would have been pregnant in February. She would have been about halfway through her sophomore year of high school. That school year ended, and then the September, she went off to the Crittenden home. Sure.
And stayed there until I was born. He was in his first semester of college. So they continued to date. Maybe a year or two, eventually, kind of like she's still in high school. She eventually goes back and finishes high school, and then she went to college. But eventually they split up, they just kind of grew up and parted ways. And she's like, I haven't seen him since 1970 or something. So, they both went on to marry other people and have families. And so she's like, I'll try to find him and let him know. But she wouldn't give me his name.
She wouldn't give you, okay, interesting.
Not initially. I think she wanted to see if he was open to it, which I think I would have pressed her for it. If she hadn't. Because I feel like that's my information. I should.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's literally what you're made of. Yeah.
It's coming up to Thanksgiving, and she has 3 children, that she raised, my half siblings. So her kids, my half siblings, are all serendipitously, they're all coming home for Thanksgiving that year. And she doesn't tell them because they don't know. So she does. But they all are, after they get over the initial shock, they're all okay with it. And she's like, she gave me their email addresses, and I started emailing them. And, we started corresponding. And so, it was all good. And in the meantime, my biological mother had been trying to get in contact with my biological father. She did get in touch with him, and he said that he would be willing to have contact with me. She gave me his name and his email address and said, here, he's on Facebook. And so I was actually in Prague when I got the first email from him. And we're messaging back and forth kind of just every day. I'd send an email, he'd send an email. It's going back and forth. And then I sent one, and then he never responded to it. We'd become Facebook friends, and, so I could see stuff. Good old Facebook notifies me that it's his birthday. So I sent him a message just saying, like, happy birthday, like, hope you have a good birthday. And I got a message back that said, thank you for thinking of me. kind of clinical and unemotional. It was all through Messenger.
Okay.
I'd sent it through Messenger.
Gotcha. That's weird. Okay.
He had asked me initially not to interact with him on Facebook.
Gotcha.
So, because nobody knew on his side either.
Yeah.
His wife knew, but he did tell her before they got married.
Oh, okay.
So she had known. Yeah, to his credit, he told her. My biological mother, she had never told her husband about me.
Right.
She said she wishes she did.
But she didn't, because people told her for years that she was, or
Yes.
for months that she was a terrible person, and to forget about it, you don't tell anybody.
I totally get it. I totally get it. She didn't. And his mother had known about me as well. Back in the day when I was born. So eventually I message him again a couple months later, and I say, I'm going to be in Boston in July, and these are the dates, and would you want to meet? Are you interested in that at all? And he messaged me back, and he said, yes, absolutely. Like, you're not coming to Boston and without me meeting you. So then we sort of struck up more of a correspondence, and at that point I'd been talking to my biological mother fairly regularly. We had FaceTimed a few times, which was crazy. And I said to him, I'd be willing to, if you want to FaceTime, like, we could do that too. And so we did. And it was good. Just kind of crazy it's just still also surreal to me.
Yeah.
So in 2018, we go back, we stop in Boston, and then I meet my biological parents. I went and had lunch with them.
With both of them?
Just the three of us.
Wow, that's weird. Okay.
Yeah, it was crazy. I never, I didn't expect anything, like that. I feel like they're very separate. They're not together. They don't have any relationship to each other anymore,
Yeah, but you're related to both of them. It makes sense.
Yeah.
Ultimately.
So it was very cool to have that opportunity.
That's amazing.
To be with both of them. Yeah, I keep in touch with all of them. It's been a bit harder on the side with my biological father. It's been more up and down, but, we've had more difficulty. There have been times where we haven't been in contact, but we are again now.
Let's move on to where I get involved.
Right. So, yeah, so my biological mother, her mother had never known who her father was. And now that I've got a new tree on Ancestry called like BioTree that I'm filling in everything. But I have this hole that I can't fill in. And I really wanted to solve this. And so I'm going through my matches, and I did like the leads method and sorted them. But I couldn't quite put it together. I didn't really know what I was looking at. And then eventually I get the match. I had one match that I knew was from that line, just one. And then I got the one that we used to solve it. That one probably came up within the last 9 months.
Oh, the blonde lady.
Yeah. So that was a new one, and a fairly new one. Mm-hmm. And I worked on that for a while, but I couldn't put it together. And so that was when I hired you to do it. You did it in like 4 hours.
Right. So so I put that thing in the Facebook group, just offering my services because things have been a little bit slow, and I offer a significant discount to my listeners. So I got on it and connected this line.
It was that match's grandfather.
Yes,
is my great grandfather is my mother's father. Yeah.
Yes. So your mother's mother is
Anna.
Oh, that's right. Yes, she's Anna.
And then
right. And so then this guy that I found, Robert.
Yep. Robert.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, and I managed to do that from just triangulating two people above him.
So I actually talked to my bio mom yesterday, and
Yes.
we kind of, we FaceTimed as I gave her my Ancestry login, and I kind of walked her all through it, and she doesn't use it. So, it's like super confusing.
Yeah,
you have all these, suddenly you've got all these trees open and you don't know where you are. And, but we went through. And so, she's not quite as interested in it as I am. I think she's like, oh, this is really cool to know who this is and who it was. But, it's hard. It was so long ago. None of them are around to even ask what happened. I love that he's on the 1920 census in Guantanamo Bay in Cuba.
Yes. He was in the military.
He was in the Navy.
Right, because he was from Tennessee.
Yeah, he was from nowhere near Boston.
And I remember when I was doing the tree, I'm like, all these people are from Tennessee. I don't know how this guy got to Boston.
Yeah.
And then we found the 1920 I found him in the 1920 census, and sure enough, he's in Guantanamo Bay, so he's in the military.
He's in the Navy, and I saw the ship. The ship is on that. The name of the ship.
Oh, cool.
The USS Florida. So I tried to find it. I did some searching. I looked. I'd love to be able to put him on a boat, on a ship in Boston.
Yes. There's got to be. A shipping. What's it called? The shipping.
Like the crew list or manifest.
Yeah, whatever. The manifest. Yeah, or something.
Or what ship he was on at that time, because maybe he could have moved to a different ship.
You're right. You're right.
Yeah, I mean, despite having all these people in the Navy, I don't know anything about the Navy.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I know. I don't either. Your grandmother was born in 1922. So he would have to have been there sometime in 1921, obviously.
I mean, I'd love to be able. I'll keep working on that. Maybe someday I can put him there. And I showed her a picture of that match, because the match had a picture of herself on Ancestry. Mm-hmm. And I showed it to my biological mother, and she said, I can see some resemblance, in them. It's kind of cool to think that we've got the right person.
Oh yeah, we definitely have the right person.
Yeah, it all fits.
It all fits. Yes.
Yeah.
Very gratifying for me as well. Well, thanks for telling the story.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me.
I really appreciate it.
All right. And that is the story. Thank you so much, Holly, for participating. Loved working with you. What a great person.
Thank you so much, Holly, for sharing your story, and everybody who shares their story on our podcast. We really appreciate it. I know that our listeners love hearing these stories. I certainly do. And
I love, there's a whole other level, like I said, of enjoyment for me to be helping listeners.
Yeah, that's great. I know.
It's like the greatest, it's the funnest thing in my life right now.
How cool is that? Anyway, I am Richard Castle, and you can find me on the interwebs, on Twitter and Instagram at Castle Songs, or you can go to my website, richardcastle.com, and find out what I do when I'm not on this podcast.
I'm Julie Dixon Jackson. You can find me on the Twitter at joolsjackson with 2 O's. Find the podcast at CutOff Genes Pod. Join the Facebook group, CutOff Genes Podcast. I also have a new business page because my old business page, which is still there,
on Facebook,
Julie Dixon Jackson. Yes, Julie Dixon Jackson, genetic genealogist. I have another one, which is not a business page. It's just a person page because it's easier to communicate with people that way.
Yes.
It's called Jules Jackson Genetic Genealogist, if you'd like to join there. And it's just going to be about what I do.
I follow you everywhere, Julie. I'm like your stalker.
Thanks, babe. And if you would like to, that's a good place to reach out to me if you would like help, if you would like me to analyze your DNA, or if you'd like me to solve your case. And one more thing.
What is that, Julie?
The truth is in your genes.